In this video we're still looking at creating effective selections, but here we're going to create a complex selection using Photoshop's channels. The appeal that attracted me to this shot was the low-lying sunset that was going on way to our left. As you can see, it's lighting the tree very nicely, but we're missing all of that lovely colour in the sky because we're actually looking in the wrong direction. So let's select the tree and that little bit of foreground, remove the sky and replace it with something with a lot more impact. Now I don't currently have the channels open on the right hand side in the layers and the history window, but I can find them by going to my Windows menu at the top left of the screen and selecting them there. And what I can do is just pick up the tab and I can drop it in there for convenience. Now with the channels we get to see all three channels together. We know that all of our colour photos are made up of red, green and blue, and they combine in a number of different shades all mixed together to produce the photographic image. So what we're going to do here is use one of these channels to help us to select the tree from the sky. So the first thing we really need to do is just select one of the channels, then the next, then the next, and decide which one of those channels defines the tree from the sky the best. Well, I think it's the blue channel, but I'll take you back to the red because now you know what you're looking for, because what we've got to do here is turn the sky white and the tree black. So we want to start off with the best chance of that. Red, no, there's too much white in the tree. Green, better, but blue, yes, that's a good place to start. So what we need to do is to make a copy of our blue channel. We can do that by dragging it down over the copy icon. We can change the name of this if we want, but this is going to be our, I'll call it selection because ultimately it will be, if I can get the spelling right. So what we need to do with this particular layer now in isolation is to use whatever means Photoshop gives us to turn the tree black and the sky white. That way we can use that as an alpha channel, and from that we can make a complex selection. I'm going to start with my levels, so I'm going to go up to my image menu. Control L is the shortcut, but image, adjustment, levels. Let's tuck that up there. We know that this is the side that controls the shadows, midtones and light tones. So if I bring this slider in, you can see what we're doing to the sky. Now what we've got to avoid doing is going too far. So we've got to pick a point where we think we've got probably the maximum, and then we start to lose some of the leaves. Now if you look very, very carefully there, let me cancel that. Maybe if I just zoom in a little bit, it'll help us to see. Control L will bring the levels back. So what I want to do is to make or bring as much lightness into the sky, but without impacting the detail in the tree any more than I can help. So you can see if I go down to about there, it looks okay. But as soon as I start to go a bit further, you can see how it starts to eat into them. So I'm going to stop about that point. There's still just a hint of cloud here. But now I can do the reverse of that. I can bring the shadows down. In fact, I'm going to, let's drag this over if I can move it so we can see a bit more of the tree. Well, I don't know about you, but that's looking pretty good to me. So I'm going to stop at that point and click OK. Then I'll hit Control 0 to fit the image on screen. Now we've got a pretty good job, I think, straight out of the box, but we've got a few things to do in the sky. Now over on the left hand side, probably the easiest way to deal with the vast majority of that is just paint white. But there is another way, and I'll show you that because we probably need that more often than just painting. Well, in my experience, I do. I'm going to go to my tools here. I'm going to choose my dodge tool. The dodge tool works with a brush, so I'm going to make the brush fairly large, and I'm going to affect the highlights. I may have to switch to mid-tones for the clouds, but probably not. And this is one of those times where we're likely to want to use the exposure up fairly high. And now as I paint over these areas, you can see it's affecting just the clouds, and it didn't affect the shadows when I went over those because we're affecting the highlights. So if I brush over there, it takes away all of the clouds, and if I continue over on the right, seeing as it's working quite well, and I will sweep over the tree as well just to make sure I've got white between all of those branches. But so far I think we're doing pretty well. Now we've got a pretty good result with the dark tones here, but some images we may not, so a good thing is to then switch from the dodge tool to the burn tool, use a nice big soft brush, but this time we switch to affecting just the shadows. The exposure, we can push that up 30–40%, not vital, and I could just paint over here just to make sure that all the center part of the tree is nicely blacked out. Now I'm going to zoom in on the right hand side here. Do we want to retain the fallen branch there? Because it can be a bit of a distraction. There are times when just viewing the tree on its own is going to be just right. So if you've got a situation like this and you'd like to omit those bits on the right, well then we can just paint them out. So I'm going to bring white as my foreground colour. You can touch the X key to toggle your background and foreground colours. I need a typical brush, not quite that size, but of course I can leave it fairly big to do most of this. But when I get down close to the grass, then I can zoom in, and what I could do is make my brush smaller, and I'm going to leave it there for a moment, and you'll see why in a moment. I'm going to do this one too. Let's get rid of them. We'll come over here. Here it's a little smoother, so I'm going to make my brush very smooth, or small I should say. Going to click and hold the shift key, so I'm painting between two straight lines to get a nice edge along there. As soon as I move away from the edge, I can increase the size of the brush and remove all of that. And the same here. I think we'll make that. Let's hit Control 0 just to make sure I'm taking out the right bit, because sometimes when we've got an image enlarged, it's not impossible to go the wrong way. Click, 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 click. So that's going to look pretty normal, I think. And then I can remove the rest. You could, if you wanted to, just quickly wrap a selection around that and flood the selection, but to be honest, once you've got a tool selected, I think most of us tend to persevere with what we've got selected. And up this one to get rid of it completely. Now across there, and we're going to have to slow down in a moment as I get closer and closer, because that bit there, now I can make my brush smaller. Well, I think you've got the idea here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go along this area here, right the way around. I'm going to leave it a little bit ragged so it looks natural when I'm finished, all the way along here and across that edge, and I'm going to take just a few seconds to paint that out. Now, having finished that little bit of painting, it does make the tree a little bit more isolated, and I hope you'll agree a little bit more interesting. But I did leave a couple of areas down the bottom here, because what I wanted to do was to make sure I got that grassy look right along the edge here. So to do that, I'm going to select black as my foreground color. I'm going to pick up my clone tool. I'm going to make a brush about that size. I'm just looking up at the opacity and the flow rate at the top leftish of the screen, holding the Alt key, cloning from that position, and I just want to paint over that area, and then I'll do the same, cloning from there to paint over that area, just so that I've got exactly the same looking grass all the way along. Control 0 will fit the image on screen. So far, so good. So what we can do now is apply the mask to a selection, or make a selection from the mask. I'm going to go back to my RGB. I'm going to hold my control key and I'm going to click the alpha channel. There's a selection that I've got made. What I'm going to do next is to go back to my layers, up to my selection tools, just pick one so I can go to select and mask. Let's drag that down to the bottom so we can see what we've actually got. What we could do here is view this on layers. Let's take a look at that. We need to inverse this, or invert it, but we can see that it's looking pretty good, I think. Let's invert it. Just looking around carefully, but I think that's going to look pretty good. So I'm going to give this just the small amount of feather. So I'm going to dial in this 0.5. That's all I'm going to give, and I'm going to output this to a layer mask. Click OK, hit Control 0. There we have the basis of another image. Now we need a more impressive background. Now I've just had a quick look through my completed images and I found the landscape you can see here. I think it works fairly well, particularly with the light in the background coming from somewhere on the left. I may have to adjust one or both of these layers, but at the moment we've got a problem with the tree. You can see the edges of the tree where some of the light from the previous image has managed to spill around the edge despite all our efforts, but this is quite normal. You are going to find this happening. Whenever you search for a new image to put behind a complex cutout like this, we have to use our photographic knowledge to pick the right image. There's no point in trying to pick something from a really bright background and put it against a really dark background unless you want to turn the tree into a silhouette. We can do that, and I'll show you how to do that before we get through this video. But for now I need to go back to my layer mask, double click to go back into select and mask properties, because down here I want to tick the box to decontaminate the colors. Now look at the tree. I'm going to output this to a new layer with a layer mask and click OK. So there I've got my original tucked up my sleeve, and there's my new image, and when we zoom in we've got a pretty good result. So if we shot this image naturally, would that background be quite as sharp as it currently is? Well, I'm not sure. I think you could possibly get away with it as it is. If it was shot with a 16mm lens, then there's every chance everything could be sharp. But it may be worth trying to make an adjustment to the background. But before I start to make changes, I'm going to change this into a smart object. Now we can do that by going to Layer, Smart Objects, Convert to a Smart Object. If I add a tiny amount of blur to this image and then when I want to change it while it's as a smart object, I can do that without any loss in quality. I can back off and experiment a bit. So let's do that. Let's go to our filters menu, blur. We've got a number of different blurs we can choose from, but I'm going to keep things simple here. Gaussian blur. I'll take the blur completely off, then we'll just bring it up gradually, looking at the picture as we go, making an evaluation. I don't think it needs very much, if it needs anything at all. What do you think? I can't hear you, to be honest. I think it works best like that. What I may do though is just give a little bit more colour to this to try to match the tree itself. So what I can do here, I'm going to just select that layer, go to my filters, and I'm going to open this in Camera Raw. So I want to give it a little bit more colour. Let's try a bit of vibrance. That's looking pretty good. Not too keen on some of the colours coming through here. Maybe if I go to my hue, click and drag, I can change it a bit more. I'll try that. Click OK. Just warmed it up a little bit, and maybe the tree. I'm just going to tone the tree down just a little bit. So let's select that and go to Filter, Camera Raw Filter. So I just want to drop the exposure a little bit. Maybe I'll drop the vibrance a little bit on here, because I originally pushed it up to make more of that colour, but now we've got it mixed with that background. Maybe that is a little bit more subtle. Now the object here is to cut out complex shapes using channels, so we need to move on. I've saved my image as a layered file, but I've flattened it into one layer, and I think we've got a pretty good result in colour. But of course we can then experiment with derivatives, and on this particular occasion I am not over enamoured with the colour, so we could consider maybe a monochrome conversion. Now with the spinning round of the screen, I've opened up a new image into Adobe Camera Raw. So this is a raw file from scratch, because what we can do sometimes to help the selection of the tree along, and here we've got a winter tree, so it's going to be a little bit easier, so I'll speed up just a little bit. But as you can see here, I've already pushed up the highlights and the blacks. Let me just quickly reset this back. That's how the picture was shot, but if I want to turn this into an alpha channel, I may as well make life easier for myself by pushing up the whites, taking down the blacks, and doing what I can to make my life easier when I get this open. So let's open this up into Photoshop. So as you can see, I have the image opened in Photoshop. I've already accessed the channels, decided that the blue channel was probably the best one, and duplicated it. So I'm just going to zoom in a little bit here so we can see it a bit bigger. Bring up my levels with Control L. I can affect the shadows just to bring them down a little bit, but it's the whites that mainly need our attention. You can see what I mean. I start to lose the ends of the twigs, don't I? So if I get to about there, I start to lose the twigs. If I bring the shadows in a bit more, maybe that's okay, because I think we could probably accept a little blocking of the shadows here. Maybe that will allow us to go a bit further with the whites. No, I think I've gone as far as I can with that. So Control 0. So now I'd be switching to my dodge tool, highlights, and I would be doing something with there and around the edge. I think my shadows are pretty good, but we'll just check by going to the burn. I've got shadows selected from the previous job. I'll just quickly wipe over there, and we're in that situation again. Do we want that tree over on the right hand side? And if we don't, we can, maybe we'll do it slightly different. We'll make a quick selection around here and just flood that, Alt backspace, flood it with white. There's the alpha channel. So if I select back to my RGB, hold the Control key, there's the selection we want to make. I'll go back into layers, and what we're going to do here is to apply a layer mask. When I do that, the mask is round the wrong way. I'll hit Control I, which is invert. There we can see the silhouette we have. Now the difference here is I'm going to make this into a full silhouette. So if we double click the mask and go into the properties, if we want to put just a little bit of feather, I've got half a pixel, I think I'll accept that. I'll just come back to, well, it looks like I've got no choice but to come back to a new layer with a layer mask, so I think I'm happy to accept that. Once I've done that, I'm going to apply the mask, so right click on the mask and apply it. So now I've got this tree floating on a transparent background. To make sure it's solid black, I'm going to click the lock, which locks or preserves the transparency of the background. Now, with black as my foreground color, I can use Alt Backspace to flood all of the pixels that were there in black. So I know everything there is solid black. Now I can put this complex selection over any dramatic sky that I can find. Once we've got that tree floating on a transparent background, we can slip any background behind the tree that we think works. You will have to search a little bit. Not every image we apply behind the tree is going to work at its best. Here we need a sky that's got a bit of drama to it, but we don't want it too dark. This one works okay, I hope you'll agree. I found another one here which wasn't too difficult. That one also works pretty well, and so does this one here. So really it's a case of you choose which one you like best. But with this one, of course, I've also got the opportunity to choose this option, or maybe bring it up a little bit and include the water as well, and I think those sorts of choices are going to be more personal. This video looks like it's going to run for about 25 minutes, which isn't bad when you consider what we've done with two completely separate trees, and I've got the potential here for 5 different images. The one we first created, making the most of the side light on the tree. I think the monochrome conversion works particularly well too. But then I've got the last few that I created, and once again I'm sure I could find other backgrounds that would fit equally as well and maybe even better. And of course I've not investigated a monochrome here, which would work pretty well. But there's the 4th option that I have, and finally the 5th and maybe 6th if we move this up and reveal the water.